Good afternoon, everybody, again on this fantastic sunny day. Today I would like to share with you some of my thoughts about the general state of user experience research that came to my mind during possibly the biggest and most complex research project that we ever undertook at the Sonda. I think it is fair to start with saying that since at least I began working as a UX researcher, the whole approach to research changed dramatically. Namely, 5 or 6 years ago, convincing a client about the role of research in any kind of IT project was nearly impossible. So research was avoided because of time constraints, because of budget constraints, or just because the owner thought that, well, his idea is perfect and we don't have to really ask anybody if what we are designing is really needed or not. Nowadays, research luckily has its worthwhile role within every single project I take part in. However, it is also a very interesting time in terms of many methods that are being used when conducting user research. We are using many traditional methods like usability testing, like interviewing, like surveys. At the same time, we see a rise of many different sources of data about our users. We have remote user research, we have more and more intense use of big data when thinking about our users, and this creates quite a problematic situation in my opinion, quite a challenging situation in my opinion. Those traditional methods, as well as those modern methods, allow us to paint, to create the general picture of the product we are designing, the general outline of what we want to design, either on the screen or in the physical world. At the same time, however, we know that the times we are living and designing it are very, very competitive. That's the first thing. And more often we are designing products not for the general population, but we are designing solutions for a very specific groups of users, groups of people, and therefore we have to take much more care when thinking about what are the needs of those specific types of users. Those traditional methods I told you about make it sometimes more difficult to see those tiny little details that make it easier to design a very innovative or a very specific solution. This realization about this current state of user research came to mind during one of the biggest projects I ever undertook. You can see a photo from one of the test sessions from this project. When I looked at it after more or less 1.5 years, I came to a very quick realization what's wrong happening here. How often do you use your favorite website when being observed by a camera behind your back? How often do you use your favorite website or app when having your eye movement being analyzed, recorded by an eye tracking device under the screen? How often do you use any kind of service when you have somebody sitting next to you asking you a question, how do you like it, what's happening, do you have any problems? The limitation of those traditional methods is that we are removing the user from the context in which he normally uses his tool. This lady here is a worker of a company we were working for, and we were testing an internal intranet of this company. After a while, we came to a conclusion that, well, this is not the situation this person is going to use this system. This person is going to use the system in her own office, on her own computer with her own tools like notebooks, like post-its, like pens, etc., etc. The situation we created here isn't really natural for this person. That's the first limitation of those traditional approaches. Those traditional methods makes it difficult to discover those tiny little details of the functionalities we design, which makes our service, our website, our product either innovative or very well tailored towards what's needed by this very specific type of user we are designing. In here, I really like to use the term coined by Dan Saffer in his very well-written book. I suppose most of you know Dan Saffer's Micro-Interactions, in which he describes those tiny little elements that makes the whole experience of using a product or a functionality completely different from either your competition on one hand, and then they allow to create experience that is very well tailored towards the needs of a very specific group of people. Those micro interactions exist on the internet mostly as in form of examples of some funny, humorous elements, like, for instance, the welcome messages in Slack. However, we are not talking purely about making our user laugh or smile when seeing such a thing when he starts his Slack when beginning his day of work. We are talking about many different elements that are not funny, they are overlooked sometimes, but without which using our product, our website would be at best a mediocre experience, or in the worst case scenario, a complete failure. Without at least trying to look for the possibilities of using such micro-interactions, we are basically designing a mass-produced websites, projects, or functionalities. In fact, nowadays, everybody can be a designer, just go to any pattern library, get some elements, piece them together, and we have a working website. What's the chance of such a website working properly and reflecting the needs of its user? Well, I suppose low. Therefore, we are looking for those elements, for those needs which allow us to create a unique functionalities, unique content, unique tools, which are designed specifically for the needs of a very specific type of user. And this very specific type of user in this case is an employee of Tauron Group, the biggest energy company in Poland, which consists of 13 different companies which span from customer relations, distribution of energy, repairing power lines, or mining the coal in Silesia, for instance. Many companies which have completely different scope of everyday's work. The whole group employs 30,000 workers working in a very different environment. So we basically create or design a system that is being used either in a cozy office with air conditioning and fresh coffee, and for a coal mine or charcoal mine near Krakow. Very different situations, very different users, and very different needs as a result. The other problem we faced at that moment was that some of those companies already had their own internal systems, intranets or intranet-like systems. So we were designing the solutions which were basically to break certain habits of those people. We were prepared that we have to design something that will be used completely out of the box by new users and by the users who already had some experience with similar system. As for the research actions we undertook, the first, I would say natural at that point, step was conducting a survey among people working at Tauron. We collected more than 3,000 answers about very different problems or needs or habits when it comes to using such internal systems. However, the result was, well, definitely not satisfactory for us. What we discovered basically was knowledge that we would also get when buying a report from Nielsen or Forrester. We discovered that, for instance, the main problems when using those internal systems was finding necessary content and tools, or, on the other hand, complicated structure of the intranet. Well, is this knowledge that allows a designer to create a very well-designed interface or intranet? Absolutely not. These are problems, but they do not point towards certain specific solutions, certain specific ideas how to change this situation. We also ask about what's the most often used element, functionality of the intranet. And again, the results weren't really a surprise. Again, any report by Nielsen or Forrester would tell us exactly the same. At this moment, we had information, we had data which would allow us to design, create some kind of intranet. But the risk of creating something mediocre at best, again, or something that would be complete failure was very high at this moment. That is why, using this data, we were able to create a very basic outline of the system we were designing. But it was another part of research that we undertook that allowed us to create a very specific intranet for very specific people working in Tauron. The second phase of this research consisted, first of all, of more than 100 hours of workshops with Tauron's employees, during which we asked them about their habits in everyday's works, about processes they were using when working every day. And then we came to the core of this part of research. We conducted the ethnographic observation of people working at Tauron. 3 teams of researchers were physically sitting within Tauron's offices, observing every day's work of people working there, asking about certain aspects of their work afterwards. Based upon this knowledge, this direct knowledge we got from observing every day's work at Tauron, we were able to quickly design certain small solutions, small functionalities, which then were consecutively tested using different part of Tauron's employees. We naturally created a flow which allowed us to quickly discover much of important insight and then immediately design and test the solutions with another part of Tauron's employee. Using this second part of research, the second phase of our research, we are able to physically feel the culture of working at Tauron, which is completely different from working in any different part of, in any kind of different company. What we discovered many very interesting facts about how people work at Tauron. I just want to present you some of those things that were either most surprising to us or on the other hand, to some extent, not even expected by the managers. As we began, many things were not known even by people who were supervising work of people at Tauron. For instance, we discovered many habits that would be completely impossible to discover using any different type of research method. For instance, we discovered that while we as an outsiders call different companies within Tauron Group by their full names, Tauron Distribution, Tauron Customer Service, etc., people working within Tauron didn't use those full names. They used short 2 or 3 letter abbreviations. They used it in their own conversation or while using certain tools, like for instance, as a very simple search engine used to look for address information of people working at Tauron. When employees were looking, for instance, for a phone number, they didn't write Tauron Distribution when they wanted to look for a person working exactly there. They were using those abbreviations like TD, TOK, as you can see here. Without this knowledge, without the knowledge of this one small but very important habit of people working at Tauron, we would design a search engine that would, well, fit all the usability standards. It would be a good tool, but without this knowledge, the whole tool would be simply useless for a person working every day in Tauron. Without observing how people actually communicate and what kind of phrases they use in such a situation, we would design a tool that would be a complete failure, basically. We discovered something that nobody really, even at Tauron, expected. We discovered that the intranet is not just some inhumane tool that we use every day to work, that tracks our work, that tells us how efficient we are, that tells us how many tasks we have to do. We discovered that people working at Tauron do want to have certain amount of control over the system. They want to collaborate, they want to create content for the system, they want to be responsible for instance, content being up to date. The immediate realization then resulted in an element which exists at every single website within intranet, a form that allows a person using intranet to report if content is not up to date, to quickly report to the person responsible for this information that it has to be changed. The willingness of people working at Tauron to create content for the intranet also resulted in a cultural shift within the company. We conducted trainings for more than 100 people who were just starting to create content from the internet. We conducted training concerning how to write a proper content, how to write content according to standards within this company. We basically conducted something that was completely out of the screen, something that was not planned from the beginning at all. We also discovered many small, minor annoyances that employees of Tauron experienced every day. Those things that we don't really think about very often, but still things that makes our work, our everyday work, less comfortable, less pleasurable. The thing that we've seen most often on every single screen in Tauron was a series of post-it notes around the screen, which we later called a sunflower effect, collecting telephone numbers, email addresses, passwords, every information that was often used by certain users, for instance, to contact the IT department if something stopped working. We also discovered how many problems people had with keeping up to date with the documents they were using. Those internal systems offered them certain templates of documents from a very simple ones like asking your boss to go for holidays to more advanced ones like changing corporate policies. People really struggled with keeping up to date with those documents and keeping access to them. What you can see here is an example of a desktop of an unnamed Tauron employee. Lots of shortcuts, both to documents, to URL addresses, things that we would never expect and we would never discover without actually observing how everyday work at Tauron looks like. These are some examples of how people working at Tauron tried to keep up to date with changing, with versions of those documents being changed. Some documents were changed several times a day, keeping up to date which version is the current one, which is the most up-to-date one, was a real disaster for people working at Tauron and often resulted in a very bad consequences. Sending a document which is not up-to-date resulted in many problems for this particular person. The result of those observations was creation of a core element of the intranet, the element which is accessible from the first second of using the intranet, the toolbox which consists of customizable shortcuts to documents, to web pages, to applications within the intranet, which is customized by the person using it, which informs a person if documents being listed here are still up to date and informing if certain changes were made. We also discovered many overlooked needs and problems that people had with very basic actions. For instance, the biggest pain a person working at Tauron had was organizing a training or a conference in a different city, because it was just impossible to check if the building I'm assigned to has a conference room equipped with projector or cables, for instance. In many cases, people were traveling 200 kilometers just to experience the fact that this particular building doesn't have a conference room and doesn't have cables to connect my laptop. Again, a very simple, very modest solution, search engine which allowed people to look for facilities, buildings equipped with needed equipment. And the last thing, those things that even managers at Tauron didn't know people were doing every day. We discovered, for instance, that employees of Tauron created their own web page, their own forum, which was used, for instance, to sell, buy, or exchange different products: furniture, books, antiques, tickets for concerts. The second thing was using the internal systems, the old internal systems, to organize themselves when people were traveling, commuting between different cities in Poland. Tauron is spread in many different parts of Poland, so that people traveling from certain cities were organizing themselves to share a car. The reaction of many managers to such information was, in many cases, they do what? But still, surprisingly, positively surprisingly, the answer was, well, if they are doing it and it's for the betterment, in fact, of the company, the fact that they can share a car is for the betterment of the company, well, let's allow them to do so, this time within the intranet. So again, to sum up a bit, the state of UX research nowadays is a very interesting one. We've got many different methods, new methods that we are often still experimenting with. But I suppose I have to say, let's embrace those new methods, those new technologies, but never forget that the element that is most important in any kind of research method, in any kind of research project, is the person we are designing for. So that let's observe the data, let's observe the people, but also let's think about if we can sometimes participate more actively in everyday life or work of a person we are designing our product or website for. Thank you very much.